The quiet before the storm, Keanu Reeves walked into the studio with calm steps. The lights above were bright, the room buzzing with laughter and quiet murmurs. He smiled gently at a young assistant who nervously dropped a microphone. Instead of walking past, Keanu bent down and helped him pick it up. "Thank you, sir," the boy whispered. Keanu nodded. "You're doing great." No cameras were rolling yet. No audience had clapped yet, but the energy was already shifting. People sensed something big was about to happen, and at the center of it all stood two men, Keanu Reeves and Will Smith. They were scheduled to appear together on a popular live talk show. The theme was Legend Meets Legend. The producers wanted fun, a bit of fire, maybe even a harmless joke or two. Will Smith had agreed, so had Keanu. But they didn't know how different their intentions were. Backstage, Will was rehearsing punchlines. He had written a few jokes about Keanu, light-hearted on the surface but laced with bite. Some crew members laughed nervously as he practiced them. "Man still writes letters by hand," Will chuckled loudly. "Someone tell him we got smartphones now." A writer nearby asked, "Are you sure he'll take it well?" Will grinned. "Come on, it's Keanu. He'll smile, nod, and bow like a monk." But the writer wasn't convinced. Everyone in Hollywood respected Keanu, not just for his talent, but for his quiet kindness. He didn't chase drama. He didn't clap back. But something in the air tonight felt different. Across the hall, Keanu sat quietly in his green room. He wasn't nervous, but he was thoughtful. His eyes lingered on an old photo tucked in his wallet, a picture of his sister and him from when they were kids. It was wrinkled, but precious. His sister was the reason he never broke down when life got hard. She was the one who reminded him to stay gentle, no matter how loud the world got. A knock came on the door. "Mr. Reeves, you're up in 5, a voice said. Keanu stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked out without saying a word. The audience clapped wildly as the host introduced them. "Tonight, we have two of the biggest stars in the world, the Fresh Prince and the humble warrior, Will Smith and Keanu Reeves." They both walked out, shook hands, and took their seats. The conversation started simple. Stories from sets, funny moments, memories of past roles. But then the host smiled a little too wide and leaned in. "Will," he said, "I heard you've got something funny to say about Keanu." The crowd chuckled in anticipation. The camera zoomed in. Will grinned, and then he began. "You know," he said, turning to the audience, "I tried texting Keanu once. Took him 5 days to reply. He sent a photo of a typewriter. I thought he was sending a ransom note." The crowd laughed, but not all smiles reached their eyes. Will kept going. "You know how some people look mysterious because they've got secrets? Well, Keanu just looks mysterious because no one knows what decade he's living in." Some laughter, a few hesitant claps, then silence. Keanu smiled softly, nodded, and looked at Will. Not with anger, not with pain, but with something deeper, understanding. "You're funny, Will," Keanu said quietly. "But there's a reason I use a typewriter." The room stilled. Keanu leaned forward, his voice calm. "My sister battled leukemia for years. During the worst times, she couldn't look at screens. They made her dizzy, tired, confused. So I started writing her letters on a typewriter. She said the sound of the keys calmed her. It reminded her of better days, of home." The crowd fell silent. Keanu continued. "I still write that way, even now. Because some habits aren't about nostalgia. They're about love." Will's smile faded. The host tried to lighten the mood, but his words were swallowed by the weight in the air. Keanu wasn't done. "And about texting," he said gently. "Sometimes I delay replying because I want to give a thoughtful answer. Not just words, but presence. People deserve presence, Will." His voice didn't rise. He didn't insult. He didn't push. But the room felt like it had stopped breathing, and Will, for once, had no words. In that moment, it wasn't about the joke or the reply. It was about the man who never raised his voice, yet somehow silenced the world with kindness. As the segment ended, the crowd didn't roar. They stood, one by one, in quiet applause, a standing ovation, not for a performance, but for a reminder that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that speaks gently, from the heart. And as the cameras faded out, Will looked at Keanu and whispered, "I didn't know." Keanu nodded. "You do now." And that was only the beginning. The echo after silence, after the show ended, Keanu walked out of the studio without fanfare. He moved through the backstage hallway like a shadow, quiet, calm, and kind to every person he passed. A cameraman nodded at him. He nodded back, and tall. Intern opened a door. He whispered, "Thank you." But behind him, the studio was still buzzing. Producers huddled together, whispering about what had just happened. Social media was already exploding. Clips of Keanu's words were spreading like fire. The crowd's silence, the unexpected emotion, the standing ovation. None of it was scripted. None of it was planned. And that made it unforgettable. Inside his dressing room, Will Smith sat alone. His face wasn't angry. It was thoughtful, confused, maybe even ashamed. He stared at the floor for a long time, tapping his fingers on the armrest of the chair. He didn't expect it to go that way. He had planned to make the audience laugh, get some cheers, maybe even trend for his humor. But instead, Keanu's words had turned everything around, and not by attacking him, but by telling the truth, by showing heart, by being human. Meanwhile, outside the building, Keanu quietly got into a black sedan. The driver, a kind man in his 40s named Marco, gave him a small smile. "Beautiful words back there, sir," Marco said, pulling away from the curb. Keanu just nodded. As they drove, Marco asked softly, "How's your sister doing now, if you don't mind me asking?" Keanu paused, then replied, "She's in remission, strong as ever. She told me once that being loved helped her more than medicine." "Ever could," Marco smiled. "She's lucky to have you." Keanu looked out the window. "I'm lucky to still have her." That night, the streets of Los Angeles seemed unusually quiet. As Keanu looked out the window, he saw a young girl sitting with her father on a bench. They were laughing over a bag of fries. Something about it reminded him of his own childhood, his mother. The long walks they used to take when they had nothing, but still had each other. He never forgot where he came from. He never let success erase the scars. By morning, news outlets around the world had picked up the story. Headlines like, "Keanu Reeves shuts down Will Smith with kindness," "How a quiet answer silenced Hollywood." Keanu Reeves reminds the world what respect looks like, but Keanu didn't read the headlines. He had no need to. Instead, he sat in a small corner cafe, sipping a warm tea. He was writing. On paper, with a fountain pen. It wasn't a script. It wasn't a letter for the media. It was a note for his sister. "I told the world about you last night," he wrote. "Not to make them cry, not for applause, but because you taught me what it means to speak with heart, and the world needed to remember that." Just then, a waitress walked over. She looked shy, holding a small notepad. "I'm sorry, sir, but were you on TV last night?" Keanu smiled gently. "Maybe." Her eyes softened. "What you said about writing letters, about your sister, it reminded me of my mom. She's in the hospital. I used to write her notes every day. I stopped a while ago. But now, I think I'll start again." Keanu placed his pen down and nodded. "She'll feel every word." The waitress walked away, holding back tears. Later that day, Keanu received a message. Not from a fan, Not from a journalist. It was from Will Smith. Just one sentence. "Can we talk?" Keanu stared at the message for a while, then replied, "Of course." They met that evening, not at a studio or a fancy place, but at a quiet park near the city's edge. Will arrived first, pacing back and forth. When he saw Keanu approach, he stood still, unsure of what to say. Keanu spoke first. "You don't need to explain," Will exhaled. "But I want to." They sat down on a wooden bench beneath a tree. Will's voice was lower than usual. Not full of jokes or charm, just raw honesty. "I don't know why I did that," he said. "Maybe I felt like I had to prove something. Maybe I thought I was being clever. But when you spoke, man, I felt small." Keanu shook his head gently. "You weren't small. You were just reaching. Reaching for what? For connection. For laughter. For attention. We all do it sometimes. But the way we reach matters." Will looked away. "I've been losing myself lately. Too many people to please. Too many cameras. I forgot who I was." Keanu paused, then said, "Sometimes. The world makes noise so loud that we stop hearing our own heart. But it never stops beating. We just have to listen again." A long silence followed. Then Will asked, "How do you do it? Stay calm, stay grounded, stay kind." Keanu looked up at the sky where the stars were just starting to appear. "By remembering pain," he said softly. "I've lost people. I've been broken. I know how heavy silence can be. So when I speak, I try to lift, not add weight." Will closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt like someone truly saw him. Not the actor, not the star, but the man. "Thank you," he whispered. Keanu stood up, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a folded note. "This is a letter I never sent," he said. "I wrote it after my friend passed away. Maybe it'll help you remember your own voice." Will took the letter with trembling hands, and as Keanu walked away, Will remained on the bench, silent, holding a piece of someone else's pain and maybe, just maybe, beginning to heal his own. When the world starts watching the next morning, Keanu Reeves woke early, not to prepare for interviews, not to face crowds or reporters, but to visit someone important. Someone who always brought him back to himself. His sister. She lived quietly, in a modest home far from Hollywood's spotlight. Her name was Kim, and her smile still looked the same as it did in the photo he carried in his wallet. As soon as she opened the door, she hugged him tightly. "I saw it," she whispered. "You talked about me." Keanu smiled softly. "I didn't plan to. It just came out." Kim nodded, her eyes misty. "You said the truth." They sat in her kitchen, drinking tea, like they used to when the world outside didn't know their names. On the table between them sat a pile of handwritten letters, some old, some recent. All of them from Keanu. Kim touched one gently. "These saved me more times than you'll ever know." Keanu reached for her hand. "And writing them saved me." While the siblings shared their morning in peace, the world outside was erupting. Major talk shows were airing clips from the night before. Commentators debated the moment on news channels. But most powerful were the messages from ordinary people. Millions of viewers had felt something deep shift when Keanu spoke. On social media, the hashtag #DaoLetterstoHeal was trending. People started writing real letters again, to parents, to partners, to friends they hadn't spoken to in years. One message read, "I hadn't spoken to my father in 8 years. Today I wrote him a letter. Thank you, Keanu." Another said, "I'm teaching my students to write letters this week. We're calling it the Keanu Kindness Project." From schools to homes to hospitals, his words were reaching places he'd never been. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were real. Later that day, Keanu's team received a call. The network wanted to invite both him and Will Smith back, this time for a special segment called Rebuilding Bridges. His agent Laura called Keanu while he was still at Kim's house. "They want to turn it into a redemption story," she said. "For Will. Maybe for both of you." Keanu replied calmly, "But this isn't a story, Laura. It's a life." She hesitated. "So, should I say no?" Keanu thought for a moment, then said, "Say yes, but on one condition." "What's that?" "It has to be real." When Keanu met Will again on camera, things were different. They weren't sitting across from each other on a stage with spotlights. They were side by side on two simple chairs. No glitz, no jokes, just honesty. The host welcomed them back, but this time, his voice was gentler. "Keanu, Will, last time something unexpected happened here. The world's been talking about it, but today we'd like to listen." The audience stayed quiet. Will spoke first. "I want to say I'm sorry," he said, looking straight ahead. "Not just to Keanu, but to anyone watching who ever felt like they were made small just to make someone else look big." He took a breath. "I forgot that laughter shouldn't come from a place of pride. It should come from truth, from shared humanity. I wasn't thinking, but that's not an excuse. I failed to be kind." Keanu nodded slowly. "Forgiveness doesn't start with words. It starts with understanding." Will turned to him. "How do you always find the right words?" Keanu smiled lightly. "Because I speak to the little boy I used to be, the one who didn't feel heard. I ask myself, what would have comforted him? And then I say that." The room fell. Silent again. Then the host asked, "Do you think the world has changed after this moment?" Keanu looked around, then said, "Not yet, but maybe." It paused, and in that pause, people remembered to listen. Will added, "And when people listen, really listen, that's when healing starts." After the show ended, the producers handed them both envelopes. Inside were handwritten letters from fans all over the world. Stories of reconciliation, of people finally saying what they had held in their hearts for years. One letter read, "My daughter and I hadn't spoken in 4 years. I mailed her a letter after watching your episode. She replied the next day. Thank you for showing me it's never too late." Another said, "Your story helped me forgive someone who hurt me. Not because they deserved it, but because I needed peace." Keanu folded each letter carefully and placed them in his coat. To him, these weren't fan notes. They were echoes of something deeper. A wave of human connection that had started with just one sentence spoken with care. That evening, as the sun set over the hills, Will and Keanu sat alone outside the studio, drinking tea from paper cups. "I've been in Hollywood for decades," Will said, looking at the skyline. "But I've never felt more human than this week." Keanu replied softly, "Because fame hides the cracks, but kindness reveals the soul." Will smiled for real this time. Not the stage smile, not the interview smile, but the smile of someone who had taken off a mask and found they were still whole underneath. "You know," Will said after a pause, "maybe it wasn't a fall. Maybe it was a reminder." Keanu nodded. "Some reminders hurt, but the ones that lead us home are worth it." They sat in silence after that. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the silence itself said everything. The ripple effect, the days that followed, were unlike anything Keanu had expected. His phone, usually quiet and used more for reading messages than sending them, was now flooded with calls, texts, and invitations. Charities wanted him to speak. News stations wanted interviews. Even schools were writing to him, asking if he would visit their students to talk about kindness. But Keanu, true to his nature, didn't rush into the spotlight. Instead, he visited a small bookshop tucked between two buildings in a quiet part of the city. The owner, Mrs. Langford, had known him since he was a teenager. When he stepped inside, She looked up with her usual warm eyes and said, "They say you've gone and changed the world again, Keanu." He smiled gently. "I didn't change it. I just reminded it." She brought him tea, just like always, and they sat in silence for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you think people will really remember this?" Keanu thought for a long time. Then he answered, "Maybe not everyone. Maybe not for long. But for some people, it'll stick. The ones who needed to hear it most, they won't forget." He was right. Somewhere in the country, a teenage boy named Noah sat alone in his room, staring at a letter he had just written. His hands were shaking. He hadn't spoken to his older brother in almost a year, not since the fight that had broken their family apart. They had yelled, blamed each other, slammed doors, and then stopped speaking. But last night, Noah had watched a video of Keanu talking about presence, about writing, about love. It stayed with him. Now, with trembling hands, he sealed the envelope, walked outside, and dropped it in the mailbox. For the first time in months, he felt something that wasn't anger. It was hope. In another city, a nurse named Elena printed a letter and placed it beside an elderly patient's bed. The woman had no family visiting her, no one to speak to. But Elena remembered what Keanu said. People deserve presence. Not just care, but presence. The letter read, "I see you. I hear you. You are not forgotten." The woman cried when she read it. Even in Hollywood, where fame often faded like dust in the wind, the moment still echoed. Keanu was invited to speak at a special awards ceremony, not for acting, but for humanitarian efforts. He had turned down such things in the past, but this time felt different. Not because he wanted the spotlight, but because he sensed the world was listening, truly listening. And he wanted to use that moment wisely. On the night of the ceremony, the room was filled with stars, actors, musicians, politicians, and icons. Will Smith was there too, sitting near the front, nodding to Keanu with respect as he walked up to the stage. Keanu didn't wear a designer suit. He wore a simple black jacket. He didn't prepare a long speech. He brought only one thing, a letter. "I'm not good with big speeches," he said softly into the microphone. "So I brought this instead." He unfolded the paper slowly. The crowd leaned in. "This is a letter I received from a young girl," he said. "Her name is Sophie. She's 10 years old. She wrote, 'Dear Keanu, I saw you on TV. You reminded me to be nice to my brother again. I wrote him a note and said sorry. He wrote back. We played together yesterday. Thank you for making me brave.'" Keanu looked up at the audience. "That's why I'm here. Not for awards, not for attention, but because somewhere, a child found the courage to love again. And if that's all this moment gave us, then it was enough." The room went silent again. Not a heavy silence, but a warm, full one. And then, without needing another word, the crowd stood and applauded. But Keanu didn't linger. He walked off the stage, down the steps, and quietly left the building. No interviews, no cameras, just quiet steps into the night. Outside the venue, as the city lights twinkled and the noise of traffic hummed in the distance, Keanu stood beneath a street lamp waiting for his driver. Will Smith caught up to him there. "You keep doing that," Will said, smiling. "Doing what?" Keanu asked, disappearing after moving an entire room to tears. Keanu shrugged gently. "Words are loud enough. My silence balances them." Will laughed softly. "You really are something else." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how kindness isn't weakness. It's control. It's choosing not to strike. Dak, I've been trying to do that lately, with my wife, with my kids, with myself." Keanu looked at him, eyes kind. "How's it going?" Will sighed. "It's hard. I'm learning things about myself I never wanted to face. But it's also healing." Keanu nodded. "Healing is messy, but it's honest, and it's worth it." Just then, Will pulled something from his pocket. I wrote something, he said. Keanu raised an eyebrow. A letter, Will explained. To my son. Haven't given it to him yet. But I will. Keanu placed a hand on Will's shoulder. He'll feel every word. In the following weeks, Keanu continued to live. Quietly. He visited hospitals, supported children's shelters, helped fund a center for mental health therapy, but never made announcements about any of it. Yet somehow word still got out, and people began to see him differently. Not just as an actor, not just as a star, but as a mirror, reflecting back what people wanted to be. Humble, honest, kind. And through it all, Keanu kept writing letters, sometimes to his sister, sometimes to people he'd met along the way, sometimes to no one, just thoughts on paper, sealed and placed in a box he kept near his bed, a box he called Hope. One day, when he would no longer be here, he planned to have them given to strangers. Not for fame, not for recognition, but for the simple reason that some words, spoken with love, could outlive a name. The letter that broke the silence. Weeks passed, and the world slowly moved on, as it always did. But something strange remained, something gentle and powerful. A quiet movement had started, and it didn't fade like a trend. Handwritten letters. Kept showing up in schools, in homes, in hospitals. Strangers wrote to each other. Children wrote to their parents. Husbands and wives began leaving notes again, not because they had to, but because they wanted to feel close. The noise of the world hadn't vanished, but something softer had slipped in between. Keanu Reeves didn't try to control it. He didn't take credit. He simply kept writing, kept living, kept listening. But then, one day, something happened. That caught even him by surprise. It was a cloudy afternoon. Keanu was in New York City, visiting a small bookstore for a quiet charity event. After signing some books and taking photos with local volunteers, he returned to his hotel. At the front desk, the clerk handed him a package. "This came for you today, sir," the young woman said. Hand-delivered. No return address. Keanu thanked her, took the package to his room, and placed it on the desk. He sat down, looked at the worn edges, and slowly opened it. Inside was a single letter. No stamps, no logos, just a plain envelope, and a sheet of folded paper. He unfolded it gently, and as his eyes scanned the words, something shifted in his chest. It read, "Dear Keanu, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Maya. I was in the audience the night you spoke to Will Smith. I had planned to end my life that evening. Everything had felt heavy for too long. But then I saw you. Not because you were famous, but because you didn't try to be. Your words weren't loud, but they reached me. And when you said, 'People deserve presents, not just words,' I felt like someone had finally seen me. That night, I walked home. I wrote my first letter to myself. It simply said, 'You matter. Stay.' I'm still here. I'm healing. And I'm writing one letter every week, to strangers, to people in pain, just like you did. Thank you for staying kind in a world that forgets how to be." Keanu didn't cry often, not because he didn't feel, but because his emotions went deep, like the ocean. They rose in quiet waves. And now, sitting alone in a quiet room, he felt those waves. He closed his eyes. Then after a long pause, he took out his pen and wrote back, "Dear Mia, I remember that night. But I didn't know you were there. I'm so grateful you stayed. Sometimes we speak without knowing who is listening. And sometimes someone hears exactly what they needed. You matter. And I believe that now someone else will hear you." Your letter reminded me why words still carry weight. With quiet strength, Keanu, he folded the note and placed it gently back in the envelope. Then he called his assistant and asked her to find a safe way to return it to Mia. And then Keanu did something unexpected. He asked to speak at a youth center in the city. No cameras, no press, just real people. The center was full of teenagers, some laughing, some restless, most carrying silent stories behind their eyes. Keanu walked in with no bodyguards, no stage lights, just a folder in his hand and a calm look in his eyes. The director introduced him. "This is Keanu Reeves. Most of you know him from movies, but today he's not here to talk about films." Keanu stepped forward. He looked around and said, "I don't have a speech today, just a letter." He opened the folder and read Mia's words aloud, every single one. At first, the room was still. Then one girl in the back lowered her head and cried quietly. Another boy shifted in his seat, biting his lip, holding back something he hadn't said in years. When Keanu finished, he looked up. "You don't have to be famous to matter," he said. "You don't have to be loud to be heard, and you don't have to be perfect to help someone else survive." He paused, letting the silence wrap around the room. Then he added, "Write to yourself. Tell your truth, even if your hands shake." And just like that, something unexplainable happened. One by one, the teens started raising their hands, not to ask questions, but to speak, to share, to open up. One boy stood and said, "My mom left 3 years ago. I never told anyone it still hurts," a girl whispered. "I sleep with a letter my grandma wrote me before she died. It's the only thing that makes me feel safe." A teacher, watching from the back, wept quietly. By the end of the hour, the youth center had turned into something else, a sanctuary, not for rules or noise, but for truth. Before Keanu left, he handed the center director a small box. "What's this?" the woman asked. "Hope," he said simply. Inside were blank letter sheets and pens. News didn't cover that visit. No. Headlines were made. No trending hashtags. But Keanu didn't mind, because some moments weren't meant to be broadcast. Some were just meant to be felt. That night, he sat by his hotel window, writing in his notebook. He didn't know it yet, but the story was far from over. In the shadows of his calm voice and kind heart, the world was beginning to change, not through movies, but through paper and ink. And soon someone from his past would return, carrying a letter of their own. The letter from the past 3 days later, Keanu Reeves returned to Los Angeles. He was exhausted, not from travel, but from the weight of everything he had carried quietly. The words, the moments, the letters, the people who had trusted him, with their pain. Still, he smiled at every person who greeted him at the airport. As he walked through the terminal, a woman approached him hesitantly. She looked to be in her 60s, holding something tightly in her hand. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked softly. He turned. "Yes?" She gave him a small, nervous smile. "This isn't for me. It's from someone else. Someone who knew you a long time ago." She reached out and handed him a sealed letter. Keanu took it gently. "Thank you," he said, watching her walk away. He waited until he reached home before opening it. The envelope was old, the handwriting familiar. As he unfolded the page, his breath caught in his throat. The letter was from someone he hadn't thought about in years. It was from Sam, his best friend from childhood. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, laughed under the same streetlights, faced the world with the kind of fearlessness only young boys could carry. But as life went on, they had grown apart. Sam had struggled, made choices that took him down dark paths. And then one day, he disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation. Now here in his hands was a letter written by that same boy, now a man. "Dear Keanu, I don't know if you'll remember me, but I never forgot you. You were the first person who saw me, really saw me, when no one else did. I still remember the day my father yelled at me in front of the whole street. You walked over, sat beside me, and didn't say a word. You just stayed. Years passed, and I messed up more times than I can count. I blamed everyone but myself. I ended up in places I'm not proud of. Then last month, I saw a clip of you talking on TV. You said, people deserve presents, not just words. I broke down crying. Because you had done that for me, long before anyone knew your name. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to tell you that I'm clean now. I'm sober. I've been working at a community center, helping young boys who've lost their way, just like I did. And whenever I don't know what to say, I remember what you taught me. Sometimes saying nothing is the kindest thing you can do. I hope we meet again someday, but if not, just know you saved someone, and he never forgot you. Your old friend, Sam Keanu, read the letter twice, then a third time. Then he folded it with care and placed it in his box of letters, the one marked Hope. A week later, he walked quietly into a small community center on the edge of the city. He didn't call ahead. Didn't tell anyone he was coming. He just showed up. The woman at the front desk looked up. Can I help you? Keanu smiled gently. I'm looking for someone named Sam. She pointed down the hall. Third room on the left. Keanu walked, slowly, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. When he reached the room, he stood at the door and watched. Inside, Sam was kneeling beside a young boy, helping him with his shoes. He was patient, calm, kind. The same boy Keanu had once sat beside, now giving that same presence to others. Sam looked up. For a second he froze. Then he smiled, wide and full of disbelief. Keanu? He whispered. Keanu nodded, stepping forward. You didn't disappear, he said. Sam stood, tears filling his eyes. I was just finding my way back. They hugged, and it wasn't the hug of two celebrities or two men. It was the hug of two boys who had once shared the same pain, the same silence, the same longing to be seen. After that, they sat outside, on a bench, just like they used to. I almost didn't write the letter, Sam admitted. Why not? Because I thought you'd forgotten me. Keanu shook his head slowly. Some names never leave us. They live in the background. They shape who we are. Sam nodded. I'm still learning. So am I, Keanu said. We all are. They talked for hours, not about fame, not about the past, but about the present, about what it meant to be good, to show up, to stay soft in a world that could harden even the gentlest souls. As the sun began to set, they promised to meet again. But even if they didn't, something had already been healed, not just between them, but inside them. Months passed. The Letter to Heal movement continued growing. Some schools even added it to their curriculum. People were starting to sit with each other again, not just scrolling, not just swiping, but truly seeing, truly hearing. Keanu kept writing. To friends, to strangers, to people who never wrote back. It didn't matter. Because writing, for him, was never about answers. It was about reaching. And someone, somewhere, always reached back. One morning, Keanu sat by his window with tea and his notebook. He picked up his pen and wrote, Dear reader, I may never meet you, but if these words find you, I want you to know something. You matter. And the world is better because you're here. Even if you feel invisible sometimes, someone sees you. Even if you feel alone, someone is walking a quiet path. Just like you. Keep going. You never know who you might save, just by staying. He folded the letter and placed it in the box beside his bed. Another piece of hope. Another whisper into the world. And maybe, just maybe, the loudest words he ever spoke were the ones he never shouted.